I'm Ron Goss. I'm a Cartersville native. For the last 3 decades, I have worked in the field of construction, and much of that had to do with historic preservation. What got me interested in the Rudy York house was we actually purchased a piece of real estate, 10 acres on Tennessee Street, and the front corner of the property contained the Rudy York house. I was familiar that it was the home of the York family, and from there it just sort of grew. The more that I found out about the house, the more that we wanted to preserve it. The most interesting thing that I found in the course of the research, maybe two-part. The Bartow History Center was able to provide us some photos of the house from when it was first built. So we were able to use that to put a few of the elements back, original, that were on the house. And probably the most interesting part of the whole process was I went from looking at it as a house, and once we got finished, the two of the York grandchildren actually came, did a tour of the house, and started sharing a lot of the stories. So we went from becoming a house to a home. And I think that helped us better understand the value of that property, the history of that property, and of course, it has made for many interesting stories as people have come through the property.
Good evening. Welcome to the Bartow History Museum's evening lecture for the month of May. Glad to see you all out this evening. Such a good crowd. Ron really knows how to draw a crowd. Well, he tells me he's related to half of you.
A lot of family.
Well, before we get started, let me give a couple of upcoming announcements. We've got a lot of good stuff coming up over the next month or so. It's summertime, so we've got camps coming up. If you've got neighbor kids or grandkids or kids that you want to send off to camp, we've got 2 great camps coming up during the month of June. Safari Seekers and Pirate Party. Now, you do have to be between the ages of 5 and 7 to go to one of those camps, but sorry about that. But if you've got kids those ages, sign them up for camp. On June 15th, we're hosting afternoon tea with Valerie. Valerie will be here to walk through the process of what it looks like to hold a tea, so a tea party. So come and learn the basics of a tea party, the history about what all the pieces of the tea party mean. Valerie Holt, by the way, didn't mention her last name, is a local educator, and she's going to walk us through the history of tea parties. Those tickets are limited, so if you're interested in that event, I encourage you to get those quick. That's on June the 15th. Our evening lecture in June is on June the 27th. Louis Tonsmeyer will be here. Anybody know Louis? Anybody not admitting they know Louis? I have not yet confirmed if the frog is coming, but I feel certain he might. Louis is coming to talk about the history of photography. If you haven't seen our exhibit yet on the other side of this wall, our temporary exhibit on the history of cameras, check that out while you're here tonight. But he's going to come walk us through the history of those cameras and talk a lot of camera and photography stories. And then speaking of Louis and cameras, he's also going to host a digital camera workshop in August. So be looking for details on that as well. And then lastly, I want to mention that this is still in the preliminary planning stages, but we are putting together our next bus tour that will take place in September. So be watching for details on that. Keith Hebert will be back to do another one of our bus tours with us, and we're going to go up through Northwest Georgia, checking out some Civil War sites between here and Ringgold, Georgia. So that's in September, so be watching for those details. All right, well, without further ado, let's get on to our main event. Let me introduce Ron. Ron and his wife Lori have been married for over 30 years, and are lifelong residents of Cartersville. Lori, raise your hand. There she is. Where they raise their now 3 adult children, who I think some are in the room. Here we go. Right, I got a clap. They live at White Columns, an 1876 Georgian home located on West Cherokee Avenue. Ron has spent the past 3 decades working in the field of construction and development in our community with his company, Pennant Construction Management. During this period, a large portion of his career has been dedicated to the field of historic preservation. Completing over 60 historic properties, his resume includes historic treasures here in Cartersville, such as the First National Bank Building, the Steins Building, and the Bradley Building, and in Calhoun, the historic Gym Theater, and over 15 iconic structures along Rome's Broad Street, and the 1869 Bartow County Courthouse, which is the building we're in today. One of his current projects is the restoration of the 1892 historic Paulding County Courthouse. His body of work has been recognized by such organizations as the Georgia Cities Foundation, Georgia Department of Industry, Trade and Tourism, Georgia Main Street Program, Georgia Downtown Association, and the Georgia Trust for Historic Preservation. In fact, just a month ago, the Georgia Trust awarded Ron his 6th Excellent in Preservation Award for his work on the Rudy York House, which is what we're here to hear about tonight. So please join me in welcoming Ron Goss.
Let me just say I like this format a lot better than the Lunch and Learns, because at Lunch and Learn, you got to be back to work. You can stay all night with me tonight, so hope you brought a pillow. I'm very fortunate in my career because I have one of the greatest careers. I get to play with a lot of old buildings, and we get to build a lot of neat things, but that is one of my interests, is the buildings and the architecture and all that goes with that. And then the great thing as well is a lot of the properties that we've got to do over the last 27 years, they also come with neat history. This building was one of them, and I was sharing with folks out in the lobby. I could just talk about this building forever. So I've done 4 Lunch and Learns on 4 of the buildings that Trey talked about, and they got to combine the construction architecture, and they got to combine the history. Well, today is a first because I get to add my 3rd love, which is baseball. Anybody that knows us, we're a baseball family. I had 2 college baseball players for sons. We raised our kids at the baseball field. I've always enjoyed the game, and I think the reason I've always loved baseball is a sport that has the absolute best history of any sport. It's got probably the best characters of any sport, and they play in the most absolute beautiful cathedrals of all sports venues. So it is fun to get to sort of combine them all tonight. If we talk about the city of Cartersville and all of the people that we can say, who were our famous citizens? All right, Trevor Lawrence always pops up because he's the most current guy, good looking guy, got a lot of hair like me, he's got that flow going. Wayne Knight, you know him from Seinfeld and Jurassic Park, the great actor. I'm going to make a point tonight that Rudy York may be the most relevant person for his period of anybody that's ever left Cartersville. The thing about Rudy York is, like a lot of things, I guess, the further you get away from the excellence, that story doesn't get told quite as much. People sort of lose, who was this person? Rudy York, let's see, there's a plaque down here on by the depot, on one of the plaques on the wall. We've got some pictures upstairs. There's Rudy York Road, but who's Rudy York? I want to tell you a little bit about Rudy York, the ball player, and I want to tell you a little bit about Rudy York, the guy down the street, with his wife Violet, and he's the painter down there. He's that guy. I want to tell you a little bit about both Rudy Yorks. Rudy was born actually in Alabama in 1913, and it was a situation early in his life. I believe he was one of 5 children. Father was not necessarily in the picture. The mom ended up moving to Georgia, basically to seek employment. So she moved her 5 kids here into the Atco area for the old Atco mill prior to Goodyear days, the old, help me. There you go, American Textile. And that's really sort of where that story begins on Rudy as a kid. We'll go ahead and put this up. I stole this from a Bartow History Center picture, so I'm disclosing that, so I'm not in violation of copyrights. Rudy showed a lot of promise as a young athlete in Atco. As a matter of fact, depending on which account you listen to, Rudy may have been hired at the mill as young as the age of 14, more so to play on the baseball team with the men than he was actually working in the mill. But you have to keep in mind, too, at that period, the textile mill leagues, in especially the South, but it really went all the way up the East Coast, they were big for communities. You look, and most of us are familiar with ATCO. You know, you lived there, you worked there, you bought your groceries there, you went to school there. It was really its own community. And for those communities, that team was their identity. It was their pride. You'd go to work, you walk a block to the baseball field, catch a game, cheer your guys on, walk another block, pick up your bread for dinner that night, another block, you're at the house, go to sleep, wake up, and do it again. Baseball was a big thing. Rudy York quickly made a name for himself in the textile leagues around North Georgia. In June of 1933, Rudy was playing second base one day, and there was a gentleman that was a scout for the Detroit Tigers. And Rudy's 19 years old. He's out at second base, and the scout by the name of Eddie Goosetree, and that's a real name, I didn't make that up, spots him playing. And he's fascinated by him. He could tell he had a lot of good skills. He had strong arm. He had an amazing bat. But he's thinking, this guy is not a second baseman. He's too bulky to be a second baseman. Don't look like a shortstop. Looks a little too slow for the outfield. He was trying to figure out who or where they could play Rudy York. But he knew that he had something special. So he sends this message back. And it says, he sends it to the head scout, and he says, I just signed a GOAT. I didn't know they used the phrase GOAT that long ago, but greatest of all time. That's what the GOAT stands for now. But anyway, he says, I signed a GOAT named Rudy York, Rudolph York. Don't know what position he could play, so it'll be your job to find out. But he was worth $250. He has $250 worth of an arm, which is what I signed him for. So Rudy York signs his first contract for $250. Not really sure what position to play him. So that follows him sort of through his professional career. We'll talk about it a little bit more later. But it was very obvious that he was an exceptional baseball player at a very young age. The rest of that year, he played with a couple of teams, low-level minor leagues. 1934 rolls around. He's down playing in the Texas League, and they said that the day before, I believe it was his 21st birthday, and he has less than a year playing a professional baseball, he gets a call to join the Detroit Tigers in the Major League. That's a pretty impressive jump if you don't know a lot how baseball works. But again, people saw the talent that the man possessed. Not really sure where were they going to play him, but they knew this guy was special. He goes to Detroit, takes the train ride up there. When he gets out, walks into Briggs Stadium. And, of course, his comment was, I've never seen a major league ballpark, much less, stood on the field of one. A year, before, he's down in ATCO. If you're familiar with ATCO, he's on the ATCO baseball fields. Now he's standing at Briggs Stadium. He does his little interview. They suit him up for a uniform. They stick him on a train to Boston, and he joins the big team. He gets there, and he's there pretty much most of the rest of the season. Detroit at the time was a great ball team. Does not get a lot of playing time. I think he gets maybe 6 at-bats, but he's with the team. He actually was with the team when they went to the World Series, even though he didn't play. But he got his taste of the major leagues, and he got his taste of the World Series. And Rudy would be back to both very soon. Next season rolls around. Again, Detroit's a strong ball team, got a lot of good players, still trying to figure out what we're going to do with Rudy. They send him to the minors. He plays down in, I believe it was Texas. That year, never comes up to the major leagues. He wins the MVP award. Here comes another year rolls around. He doesn't make the major league team, stays in the minor leagues. I believe he was with the Milwaukee Brewers. He wins their MVP award. 1937 rolls around. It's spring training. He makes the Detroit Tigers. All right. He makes the Tigers, and they're still trying to figure out what are we going to do with this guy. So they play him some at third base to start the season. He spent some time on the bench, but he starts hitting and he starts showing the promise. Here's a couple of pictures of young. I love this one. To me, there's just something about the youthfulness in him in this photograph here. 1937, he's playing some third base. They move him behind the plate to the catcher position, and he just locks in there the rest of the year. Everything's going good, and then August rolls around. Prior to August of 1937, there was a guy by the name of George Herman Ruth that had set the record for most home runs in a month. Now, if you know anything about Babe Ruth, there was Babe Ruth, and the rest of baseball was way down here. If you look at when he retired, how close anybody was to his record, nobody was close. He was an icon that was beyond, he was Superman. August 1937, Rudy York has his month. He breaks the Babe's record, hits 18 home runs. What did it do for Rudy's career? He makes the cover of Newsweek magazine. The question is asked, Rudy York, the greatest slugger since Babe Ruth, he is now on the map, and he is not going back down to the minors. I acquired this picture about a year ago, and this is my favorite picture because as he goes into the next year, 1938, you have to keep in mind in the United States back then, we didn't have TV, we didn't have all the other forms of media. You basically would listen to a radio and you look at a newspaper. Not all your communities had newspapers. Your big boys and your big cities would print those newspapers. They'd get mailed out. You may get them a week later, but that was your news source. So sports guys that are covering baseball, especially when two titans like the Yankees and Tigers got together to play, what did they do to get that picture that they wanted for the front of the sports page? They would assemble the greatest players on the field. All right? And this tells you really the company that they thought Rudy York was in at this point. Hall of Famer Bill Dickey with the Yankees, there's Rudy. There's his teammate who would be a friend and a associate for many years, Hank Greenberg. The next guy over is a guy by the name of Lou Gehrig. This was Lou's last year in the major leagues before he arrived the next year and realized something's wrong. And of course, we all know ALS is now associated with Lou Gehrig, and so this was his last full year. Lou Gehrig was the guy that replaced Babe Ruth on the Yankees as the marquee player. The last guy down there, I think we call him Mr. Coffee. That's a 23-year-old Joe DiMaggio. But some of the greatest players of that era, and who did they put right in the middle of them? Rudy York. 1938, this was his first All-Star season. First time he made the All-Star game. He would make 7 of them in his career. 1940, he would play in his first World Series as a player. They would lose to the Reds. 1942, Rudy probably is feeling pretty good about himself. He's been on the cover here. I mean, he's doing good. Got his picture made with celebrities. So he holds out in spring training. He signs his contract finally for a whopping $9,000. Now, if you're trying to figure the math, that's about $170,000 in today's dollars. A far cry from Chipper Jones' salary, but that was massive money. I mean, and that said a lot about how they viewed him and his relevance. It was interesting that he also had a bonus that was thrown in there too. If you get 100 RBIs, you get an extra $5,000. He fell just shy of that, but he did have a great year. He hit a 2-run home run in the All-Star game that year to help win the All-Star game for the American League. He continued. 1943 was probably his best year in baseball. He led the league in home runs and RBIs and total bases. Finished third in the MVP race. The 1944 All-Star again. Tigers just finished short of a World Series. There's some more pictures of us here. I love the crowd shot. Just to me, just a wonderful depiction of baseball in the 40s. 1945 rolls around. It's going to be his last year in Detroit, but it's a big year for him because he wins his one and only World Series title in 1945. Rudy was one of those guys that in the early 40s, a lot of guys had gone off to war. A lot of the baseball players, Hank Greenberg, his friend, who was the other big star on that team, had gone off for a couple of years. So Greenberg now is coming back late in 1945. Greenberg is in his mid-30s, getting a little bit older. They had moved Greenberg from first base to the outfield years earlier to let Rudy now play first base. But Greenberg can't play the outfield much anymore, so they had to make a decision. So they moved Hank back to first, and the guy that they couldn't quite figure out the position, they sent him to Boston in a trade. I'm going to show you a picture here. This picture, before we leave the Detroit years, this picture was taken this last weekend. This is in the new park for the Detroit Tigers. Michael and Cal and I did a road trip. We caught games in Cincinnati, Detroit, and Chicago, and we're walking through the stadium, and you look up, and there's the banner for Rudy York. Years later, the Detroit Tigers still acknowledge him and his influence for that franchise back during that period. That was sort of neat to see. I wasn't looking for anything Rudy York in Detroit, but it found me. It was there. I couldn't miss it. It was big. 1946, he joins the Boston Red Sox. The second guy over is a guy by the name of Dom DiMaggio. That's Joe's little brother. He was an all-star, one of the big players at the time. Rudy's the fourth one over. The skinny guy on the end is some guy by the name of Ted Williams, considered one of the greatest hitters of all times. They would team up and have an amazing year. They would go to the World Series, would end up losing, but again, Rudy is back in the World Series on the big stage. 1947 rolls around. 1947 is just sort of one of those years. Rudy had come out of the gate a little slow. Boston was seeing some struggles. They were, as a team, I think they were having some challenges. There was an incident with a hotel fire. Involved, I think he fell asleep and he had a cigarette in his hand and it caught the room on fire. So, with all the factors sort of in together, and again, another situation where we're going to play him and all consistently, Red Sox make a decision to trade him to the White Sox in Chicago. I mentioned I was in Chicago last week. As we're walking in the stadium, they have a big banner there. That's Frank Thomas from Columbus, Georgia, who's their Hall of Fame first baseman. They had a banner there of all the all-star first basemen in White Sox history. Number one on the list, Rudy York. So, again, another franchise, we're walking in and they recognize, his greatness for him during that period. Again, not that I was that one. Actually, I wasn't looking for. I never thought I'd find that in Chicago. But anyway, that was neat to see him recognized there. When he joined Chicago, the season had already started in Boston. He gets traded over. He picks up the pace, has a good year, plays in his seventh and final All-Star game. There was another incident with a hotel room and a cigar. So anyway, they're looking at sort of that. They're looking at an aging athlete, trying to figure out again, do we keep an old guy? Do we bring up a new guy? So they decide not to re-sign him at the end of the year. I heard Joe York Rudy's son about 20 years ago at a lunch and learn at the building at the other end of the bridge. And he talked about this period in Rudy's life. And you have to keep in mind that the day of an athlete, of a baseball player back then, consisted of waking up, going to the ballpark, playing the game, going back to a hotel room. Most of them sat around, drank, smoked, went to sleep, got up, did it again, got on a train. There were no nutritionists. There were no trainers. There was no real, support, like we have in today's ball game. In listening to Joe York talk about this years ago, he said he had a conversation with his father. And this was years after Rudy had left the game. And he said, I wish I'd have known. I wish I'd have done things different. He said, exercise, cigarettes, alcohol. He said, I know that I lost 2 to 3, 4 years of a career just by those habits. And but that wasn't an uncommon thing. If you go back and look, a lot of guys in that era, that's what sort of cut those careers a little bit shorter. I will say this, as a person that is engaged in baseball, loves the history, if the man had played a few more years, he would be in Cooperstown because he was that quality. When he retired, he was, I believe, 10th all-time in home runs. So you think about that. He was that level of a player. But again, just a few years short of probably being in the Hall of Fame. When he finished his career, he had played 13 years in the major leagues. Had a .275 batting average for those that keep up with stats. I mean, that's pretty good. 1,600 hits, 277 home runs, played in 1,600 games, 3 World Series, 7 All-Star games. There's not a kid at the Atco Fields right now that wouldn't take that in a heartbeat and say, I would have that career. I think anybody that has ever played the game would think, my gosh, if I could only be that guy. All right? We'll talk a little bit more about some of his accomplishments in a minute, but I want to talk about the fact that he was a baseball lifer. If you know what that means, it's just you can't get the game out of you can't get that game out of your blood. From 1949 to 1957, he was on and off, back and forth in different leagues. For a couple of years, right after he retired, he went to minor league teams, and he was their manager and a player. One year, he had like 34 home runs, 100-something RBIs. I mean, that was just a massive year. All right, so he still had it, just not the major league level, but he still had it, still loved the game. In 56, he became a scout for the New York Yankees. Went back managing in the minor leagues, I think, for the Cleveland Indians in 1957. I think at that point, maybe Hank Greenberg, I think, was the general manager of the Indians. I think there was some connections there, how he became an Indian coach. 1958, he returns to the Boston Red Sox organization. The first year as a minor league coach. In 1959, he gets called up to the big team, and I believe he spends 5 years there. He was their hitting coach. So when he arrives, he is now the hitting coach for Ted Williams at the end of his career. His former teammate, and I'm sure that Rudy York was taking all credit for everything that Ted Williams ever did on a ball field. All right. The year that Ted Williams retires, the following spring, a rookie comes up. And Rudy York is now the batting coach for another Hall of Famer to be by the name of Carl Yastrzemski. So he was very influential in Carl Yastrzemski's career getting started in Boston. For one day in 1959, the Red Sox had fired a manager, and they had not named a new manager. So for one day, Cartersville, Georgia, had a native son that was the manager of the Boston Red Sox. A lot of people don't know that. You don't have to tell people, if it's you, that it was one day. I was the manager of the Boston Red Sox. After his tenure with the Red Sox was up, he did manage some in the minors again. and he was a scout, I think, with the Houston Astros. This is why the courthouse moved, by the way, in the 1800s or 1900s. We'll let it go by. Talking about Rudy's career, like I said, I think any kid would want his career. He had an amazing career, but Rudy, this is what's always sort of intrigued me about Rudy York. He had a great career, but Rudy just did the absolute freakiest things on the baseball field. Stuff that was incredibly hard to accomplish, Rudy did it. And he didn't do one or two things. His career is just full of these anomalies that he was able to accomplish. And what's cool too is, and these are a couple of things that have popped up over the last couple of years, is you'll see his name continually in baseball pop up. We're watching a Braves game one night. This one pops up. We'll talk about it in just a second. I'm going to give you some examples of some things that Rudy did. We talked about the most home runs or talked about his home run month in 1937. I'm going to go ahead. I'm a baseball purist. If you were a drug user in the 90s and early 2000s, performance-enhancing drugs, I call you a cheater. I don't count you. So Sammy Sosa, you're off my list. You don't count in this conversation. This is for the legit nice guys. But home runs in a month. I told you that Rudy in August of 1937 breaks Babe Ruth's mark, 18 home runs in a month. You ready for this? I want you to think about this. It took 80 years for another player to match his month. Stanton with the Marlins, I think it was 2017, 2014, he had 18 in the National League to tie the mark. Rudy was pretty good in August of 1937. Apparently he loved August, because in 1943 he does it again. He hits 17 home runs in a month. All right? In the 148 years of Major League Baseball history, only one player of the 20,662 players as of yesterday that have played in the Major League, only one player has had a better month than Rudy York's second best month when it comes to hitting home runs. Let that sink in. To me, that's an amazing stat. Grand slams. We know grand slam is when you have your teammates on all three bases. You hit a home run, 4-run score. Rudy is one of 13 people of the 20,622 players in the history of the game to hit 2 home runs in a game. He had 12 grand slams in his career. All right, when he retired, Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig had more. In the 76 seasons after that, only 28 players total have hit grand slam, or have hit more grand slams. All right, elite company. He's in the top for that. Runs batted in that month of August 1937, he had 50 runs batted in, 50 home runs, 50 teammates driven in. In the last 87 years, only 2 people out of the 20,622, you're going to remember that number in a minute, have ever matched that, 50 in a month. His second best RBI month, August 1943, he has 43. That is still the 14th best month all time. So he has 14th and he has one more above it. In the past 70 years of Major League Baseball, no player has ever matched his second best month. A few years later in 1946, Rudy had 10 RBIs in one game. Only 5 players in the history of the game have ever done more than that. We'll go to this one. This pops up a couple of years ago, 2022. Francisco Lindor had joined this club. There's 12 people that have accomplished this feat. Scoring a run in a game, driving in a run in a game for 10 consecutive games. There's 9 Hall of Famers on that list. And there's Rudy York. Elite company. Remember I said that he was sort of a guy of that position. They sort of concerned about his ability to play defense. even at his weakest part of his game, he led the league in assists in 42, 43, double plays in 44, assists, double plays, putouts in 46, putouts and field in percentage in 47. Even at his worst part of the game, he was still leading the league. I saw this this last thing I'll give you here on stats last year. So this is not a baseball guy that came up with this. This is a mathematician. They said, all right, of all these guys that played the games and all the games that have been played in the history of baseball, what is the absolute hardest thing to accomplish? So what would be the absolute rarest feat based on mathematics? So they come up with a list of like 10. The 10 most impossible things to do in the game of baseball. Rudy York did 2 of them, and he did it on the same day. All right, you remember these? In the early 30s, Wheaties came out with that Breakfast of Champions. They'd put the athletes. You know you've arrived when you're on a box of cereal. That was one of the advertisements for Wheaties years ago. One other thing, too, about Rudy, and this is sort of one of those facts that there tends to be a little gray area. I've asked this question of family before. We're still trying to sort of figure out maybe some details on this. So Rudy's great-grandmother was a full-blooded Cherokee, and there's apparently some other family members that had Cherokee. So from an early point in his career in the minor leagues, they used to reference the Native American heritage, and they would call him the Big Indian, the Chief. Rudy just sort of ate it up. This was a press photographer back in the early 40s that brought a headband. Rudy put that thing on, cheese for the camera. The Baseball Almanac, when you go look at it, they list 52 people in Major League history that had a certain level of Native American in their heritage. Rudy is one of those 52. If you look at the list, he is the most accomplished Native American ancestry person to have played in the major leagues. Compliments of the Bartow History Center and staff. I want to talk a little bit about Cartersville's Rudy, the guy that lived here in town, the guy that wasn't in Detroit and Boston, but the guy that was down the street. This picture was taken in, we think, around 1938. The house was built between the 1937 and 1938 season. So I'm gonna tell you a little sidebar about the house and about, let me just tell you the story. So a few years back, we had some stuff stolen from our office. Had a bunch of Rudy York stuff that we had in a case. We had a letter that we had acquired. It was an original letter typed by Rudy York, and it was dated late 1937. He had typed it. He had signed it. Walter Briggs, the owner of the Tigers, his office had received it. You know how in the old days the secretary would put the stamp on it and had the date? So it had the date and the stamp of Walter Briggs. And the letter said, Mr. Briggs, can I get an advance on next year's salary? I need $1,200 to pay for the house that I'm having built in Cartersville. And it was this house. That letter is now, who knows where it's at. Like I said, it was stolen. But it was the letter about this house. This picture was taken soon after they moved in the house. That is Rudy and Miss York's 2 oldest kids. And that's taken on the front steps of the house. What's great, and I'm going to get a plug for the Trey and his staff, for years when we do historic properties, one of the first things we do is we check with these guys and say, what pictures have you got? When we acquired the house, we'll look at some pictures in a minute. A lot of the features were gone, but this picture helps us put back some of the features of the house that was missing. But I love this picture. This picture hangs over the mantle in our office, which is the Rudy York house. Rudy Married Violet in 1931. They're 18 years old. They're both from Atco. At the time, he was working at the mill, playing for the mill. Soon after that, he has their daughter, Mary Jane Pruitt, who was born in 1932. At the time, they still lived in Atco. Joe soon followed in 1936. At that point, Rudy's playing in Milwaukee. Blanche was born later, 1940. She's not in this picture, which leads us to believe it was prior to 1940. But while he was playing in Detroit. Rudy was a person that, if I got another picture coming up here. Here's some pictures of the family. This was taken actually in front of the mantle in their house. Rudy, the two oldest kids, his wife. That's the three kids, his three kids when they got a little older. Looks like it, I don't know if it was Easter or church day or what, but they were all looking dashing in their outfits. The top picture, that's Rudy the painter. Anybody recognize that building? Have a clue where that building is? There's a secret to the picture that'll tell you exactly what it is. Anybody? You get bonus points. You get to come back and listen to Lewis for free next time. It's no, it's Jefferson's on Main Street, and the reason you can tell is look in the reflection. You see the old Lay's building behind it. So, and these were compliments of the family photo album. I'm going to acknowledge somebody in just a minute that's with us. Rudy, when he wasn't Rudy the ball player, was Rudy the guy that had the farm out on Rudy York Road. He loved his farm, loved to tool around with that. Rudy that had the orchard behind his house on Tennessee Street. Rudy that apparently was obviously helping Miss somebody was helping Miss York with flowers, because that place was beautiful. If you look at a lot of the old pictures of all the flowers and the greenery they had growing. Rudy enjoyed the game of baseball here in Cartersville. Rudy was so we got some more pictures. Rudy loved being around kids, loved being around baseball, loved sharing baseball. This is a picture with one of the grandkids in their backyard. He's teaching them the game. That's a picture of some little leaguers here in town. Joe York tells a story. This is Rudy the dad right here. Joe told a story about when Joe was in high school and at Cartersville High School, and I guess they needed an umpire. So, well, Rudy's a professional ball player. What better to have, for an umpire as a professional? So Joe's up to bat. Pitcher throws the ball. Joe thinks, well, that ball's outside. Rudy rings him up. Strike three, you're out. Joe says, I couldn't have hit that ball if I tried. The dad, Rudy, says, well, we never know. You never tried. I think I've said that to my kids. I thought that was a great quote, but that just showed the father side of Rudy. Rudy worked the Forestry Commission for a while. Rudy, of course, was known as the painter for years. My grandfather was a builder here in town, James Lewis, for years, and they were close buddies. Rudy was his painter, and they lived near each other. And my aunts would talk about, I have two aunts that are just a little bit older than me, would talk about when they were with my grandfather that stopped by the house. Rudy would give them the little mini bats, that had his name on it. My grandfather talked about what a good craftsman he was for the paint. Matter of fact, my grandfather tells the story of that our house out at Center was probably one of the last ones that Rudy painted before he got sick. But they were good friends, and he'd just sit around and listen to my grandfather back when he was alive, talk about Rudy, his buddy, just a great companion during the day, on the work sites. Rudy developed lung cancer in 1969, had some surgery. a couple of months later developed pneumonia, and of course he passed away in 1970. Miss York stayed in the house to the mid 80s, ended up, I think, moving in with a son when she got a little older. And she left that house after 47 years, and that property was sold to Ernest Cochran, who was one of the neighbors. And many of you probably know Ernest from his days running City Motors. He may have bought a Ford from Ernest, but he owned that house for about 35 years. So here comes our connection, how we got involved with the house. After Ernest passed away, his daughter was looking to sell it. She asked us to help, and she wanted to sell the whole thing, as the whole 10 acres as one parcel. So it was very obvious that everybody was interested, was looking at mowing the whole thing down. People want parts of it. So finally, she sort of told me what she needed to get for it. So at a party wanting to buy half of it, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll go in together. You buy the back half, I'll buy the front half. I thought, well, that'll give me the house on the front of the property. The guy ended up backing out. We ended up buying the entire property. So I go home and I'm telling the kids, well, we're going to buy this property, blah, blah, blah. Of which one of my kids chirps, yeah, we know what Dad's going to do. He's going to turn that thing into a baseball museum. All right. I think his words were, he's going to turn that whole house into a baseball museum. I proved him wrong. The whole house is not a baseball museum. We purchased that a couple of years ago. We were at the point where we need an office. The tenant we had moved out. Let me see what I got next here. Here's the house. This was it when we bought it. So the tenant moved out. The preservationist in me looks at that and just cringes. So like I said, we called Trey. We got pictures. And if you'll notice, like the old handicap ramp, it had been a business. It was rented as a house for a while, became a business. So we have the handicap ramp. We have the chimney up top that's missing half the chimney. The porches, the handrails, the original stuff's all gone. Notice the asphalt parking lot right up to the front door. So this is what we started with, and this is where we sort of went. So we used the pictures, and we recreated all the arches and the handrails. We restored the chimneys. We did the house first, and then we moved to the outside, pulled all the asphalt out, tried to restore all the landscape, moved the parking. What parking was in the front, we put it to the back. That was the back of the house when we got it. The monument place was back there. So we went from that to that. So we cleaned it up. I'm going to tell you a funny little story about the door that you see here. So that door goes down to the cellar basement area. And one of the neat little things we found was apparently Miss York ruled the roost because apparently Rudy had to go down if he had been out working, been on the job, been in the field or whatever. He'd have to go down to the basement. Rudy had him a shower rigged up down there. So he would have to shower in the basement. He had poured steps that came up, and there was a hatch in the pantry. So Rudy, I guess, once he was clean enough, could pop up out of the pantry and go into the house. But I just thought, man, every guy's got it rough, don't we? I mean, we got it bad. But I thought that was just sort of the neatest thing to sort of piece that together. And I had been told of that before I bought that house, but once we sort of saw it unfold, I thought that was interesting. Here was the kitchen. So that's the original old cast iron sink. You see it's got rusted and all. The tile work, I'll talk about the tile in a minute. The tile was in bad shape. A lot of it was falling off. You can see the layers of paint over there. Here's our kitchen now. So we reglazed it. Now you can see the tile. So I had been told this story by about 3 people at this point. And I know 2 of them had actually had heard the story direct from Miss York. So I guess, Rudy did painting and did work on houses. He did tile work and all. So Miss York tells Rudy, I want one of those nice tile counters like you put in other houses. So apparently she leaves. Well, Rudy goes out to the garage and, I mean, he's using his brain here. Why should I go buy anything? I got scraps from every single job I've ever done. So there's not a tile pretty much there that matches anything. But it's absolutely beautiful. All right, so we had it restored. We had it all regrouted, had it cleaned, had it all reattached. That is one of the neatest countertops. And when the grandkids, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, when they came through, that was one of the things that they noticed too. The tile tops were still there. I love that. I wanted to keep it because that's really part of the history of that house. A great story. We never heard what happened when she got home. Here's the living room. I told you I didn't turn the whole house into a museum, just small corners of it. The common area, we wanted to sort of keep it period appropriate. So we tried to use the decor in the living room, the dining room, that would be period appropriate. That corner there, we created a display area for Rudy York's memorabilia. Here's our dining. This is our conference room. Also doubles as a table if we work late at dinner, But so that's the fireplace where a lot of the family pictures were taken in front of. Tray you see over the mantle. I have your picture. This was the upstairs bathroom before we started. I mean, you see sort of the house was in disrepair. This is the sort of after picture of the downstairs bath. So the house had a lot of paneling over the walls where your plaster would crack and all, and how everybody got that at that point back in some point in time. Everybody wanted to put paneling over everything. So this had paneling over it. When we took it all down, we noticed, we could tell that the tile went up so high, we could tell certain things. We found some of the pink tile actually behind that. So we decided we're going to take it back like it was originally and go with a pink bathroom. And the problem was we couldn't find pink. So we went with white tile, and then we had somebody glaze it the original. So we tried to get it back as vintage as we could. Our hardwood floors, this house has absolutely beautiful hardwoods, but you can see what we started with. This is 80 years of grime and everything that happens to a house. We had them strip the floors down. They have beautiful oak floors downstairs, and upstairs it has beautiful pine floors. This is the, I'll talk about this real quick. I've heard this a couple of times from sources. That used to be Joe York's bedroom when he was a boy growing up in the house. And apparently Joe had a smaller bed, so if you go up there, it's a smaller area, but it was a small bed for a smaller kid. When Hall of Famer Hank Greenberg would come in town, apparently he stayed with them several times. Can't sleep in Rudy's bedroom, They had the two beds side by side, you couldn't sleep in there because the wife's in the other bed. I think the grandmom was in the other bed, other bedroom, so we can't take her. So what do? We put him in Joe's bedroom. Well, the story is the kids would go in there and thought it was entertaining because you would see 6'4" Hank Greenberg with his hands and arms hanging off the bed, laying on the floor. But that was a little bedroom. We actually had to take the door down. We had to do some alterations to meet code. So anyway, we sort of left that open. But that upstairs is actually really nice.